After the Democrats' big loss, the Monday morning quarterbacking is now in full effect.
So why didn't the Dems' messages connect with voters? Fox 6's Teresa Perillo is live in the news.
Season 1 of Shifting Terrain happened to coincide with the run-up to the 2024 presidential election. It wasn't the plan, but it worked for our focus on the working class and politics. We knew working class voters had the power to determine an election, but politicians, pundits, and pollsters couldn't quite get a handle on what was coming. Now, a year later, we're talking to people who've got the personal and data-driven perspectives on what happened with the working class vote and what the future could hold, if we want real change for working people. Welcome to Shifting Terrain. I'm Rachel Rybichek, a working class sociologist who spent a long time thinking about class and race. I'm having conversations with experts and everyday people to amplify the cultural and political issues both capturing and dividing America's working class today. We'll start off talking with Drew, a 29-year-old electrician in Ohio, a former swing state where Trump gained a significant number of Latino voters and is particularly popular with working-class white people.
My name is Drew. I am from Northeast Ohio, live outside of Cleveland, and I'm a union electrician.
Are people talking about politics in your friend group, your neighborhood, your family members?
My family members aren't too into it. Doesn't seem like. My wife talk about politics a decent amount, just like, oh, did you see that? And then friends, people talk, politics some, but I think people are burned out on politics. So I feel like people don't talk about it as much.
When did you notice that happening, that people were burned out?
Towards like the actual election last year, people were just kind of getting to be over it because it was just everywhere. It's all anybody was talking about. And now even I don't hear people talking about it as much. I think just because everyone's so overwhelmed with everything that's going on.
So talk of the election was everywhere leading up to the election. What kinds of things were people saying?
The people that you could tell were voting for Trump were just kind of under the spell, I think, of he's going to help us. He's going to put in place policies that are going to help working people. And I don't see that.
And like what kinds of policies or like what kinds of changes did people want to see and think were going to happen?
I think there's the propaganda of that immigrants are ruining the country and like getting rid of all them. So that seemed like a big one for them. And just the whole drain the swamp mentality that he was pushing the whole time. And because, after his first term, the economy seemed to do pretty decent. I think they trusted that, like, all right, it was going to keep going that way and just get better.
There's this debate that happened after the election when there's this very clear surge of working class voters voting Republican. And so the debate is, are working class people voting based on their economic interest, or is it cultural? And that cultural piece can look like racism. They want immigrants out of the country. It can mean wanting traditional Christian family values, and so being against trans people and queer people. That it can also be about abortion.
Yeah.
Based on the conversations you're have had, what do you think is really driving people's choices?
100%. I think it's more social issues than it is actual economic issues. Issues like abortion and trans people and gay rights and racism. I think social issues have definitely went up over economic issues as far as how they voted. I did genuinely believe that.
You were also just saying that people wanted costs to come down and draining the swamp. And
there was also talk of, I honestly forgot about social issues for a second when we were talking about that, but there was talk of, not liking trans people in sports. And then the abortion debate is always gets brought up when people talk about stuff like that. And so I definitely think it was more of a social issue that people were voting for rather than economic. As far as, like I said, the guys that I'm working with, because we're in a good spot because we have a pretty strong union.
So you think if they were hurting economically more, that would have been more important than any of the social stuff?
I think so. But then again, I don't know if that would have changed their vote, because if they were hurting more, then I think because Joe Biden was in office, I think they would have been more likely to blame Democrats for that. So they would have probably voted the other way anyway.
So now that it's been a year since the election, what kinds of things are people saying about how things are going?
Well, because my union is mostly white guys. And there's some guys that are vocal that they think the ICE raids and all that stuff is wrong. But I think the majority of them don't care too much. The most complaining I hear from people is that things are more expensive. Grocery bills are high, utility bills are high. And that's the main complaints that I hear from anybody talking about politics. But I don't hear people talking about politics too much anymore.
When they're complaining about prices going up, do they say anything about Trump or Republicans? Or are they just...
Not really. They just kind of think it's all bullshit. Like, it's all just like corporations. I feel like the people that were really vocal about Trump don't really bring his name up a whole lot.
Why do you think that is?
Probably because they were wrong. They don't want to admit it.
It was interesting to talk with Drew and to hear that his coworkers were focused on social issues, which drove them to vote Republican, but also thinking Trump would deliver better economic conditions while also draining the swamp. So which is it, economics or culture? To hear some convincing arguments for what went down with the working class vote, I'm talking with Jared Abbott, a political scientist, professor, and director of the Center for Working Class Politics, who collaborated on a major survey about voters in the Rust Belt. You've been thinking about working class voters for a while, and recently released a report based on a survey of 3,000 voters across Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin. What did you learn from this research?
Well, the first thing we learned is that Democrats have a toxic brand in the Rust Belt. And we wanted to sort of see just how important that might be in elections. And so we tried to get the strongest candidates that we could find in terms of reaching working class voters in the Rust Belt. And so we put together these profiles of candidates that were, economic populists, or talking about the harms that are elites and the need to, raise up working class folks and give them a shot at a better future, et cetera. And we made different candidates Democrats, and we made some independents. They were exactly the same except for the partisanship of the candidate. And that one fact alone dramatically penalized candidates in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio. There's something about just being a Democrat, which is not necessarily putting Democrats completely out of contention, but which is dramatically penalizing them. And we wanted to know why and what we could do about it. And we found that, well, when you ask people, what do you think about when you think of the Democratic Party? A lot of people do talk about the party being out of touch culturally and being too woke and too extreme and that sort of thing. But more than that, people focused on the Democrats just are not trustworthy. They're not a party that people believe would actually deliver on the things that they say they're going to deliver on. And they're not a party that working class people think actually represents their interests. Part of our goal then was to kind of figure out, well, what are the types of policies that Democrats and independents, for that matter, could run on, which might be most compelling to working class voters. And so the last part of our survey was to do a test of like 25 different economic proposals. And so we actually forced people to choose which of these policies is most important to you. Do you think should be prioritized the most? And we found that regardless of partisanship, regardless of class, regardless of geography, et cetera, there was a set of robust progressive economic proposals, everything from capping prescription drug prices to trying to, ban members of Congress from engaging in stock trading, and even more expansive programs like stopping corporations from involuntary layoffs of workers without just compensation, pulled very well, basically across the board. So the sort of punchline there is that, yes, while Democrats have this major reputational problem, one of the ways in which they're going to be able to regain some of that trust is offering a set of clear economic bread and butter proposals which show working class people that Democrats really care about them and that they're focused like a laser on making a better future for working class voters.
Have you thought about the results of this research and reconciling those things over time, looking historically, in addition to how we got to where we are right now?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, Democrats have historically, starting back in the 1930s, under the administration of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, the Democratic Party has been the party associated with, and in fact, delivering all kinds of benefits from Social Security to basic labor protections and union rights. And that started to change, obviously, in the passage of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994, which had the effect basically of gutting many communities, particularly in southern towns that had like textile manufacturing and other sorts of manufacturing that could be sent to Mexico, basically. And even before that, in the 1980s, as European and Japanese competition for manufacturing got stronger and stronger, and communities throughout the Rust Belt, were losing jobs, the Democrats just didn't really do very much to try to stop it. They didn't help unions very much. And all this kind of came together to create a toxic brew in which many working class people just didn't trust the Democrats anymore as they moved away from a focus on working class issues and toward a greater focus on highly educated voters, starting with the Clinton administration. And on the other hand, well, what about the Republicans? Well, yeah, I mean, they haven't delivered for working class people. That's true. And they keep promising, at least Trump does, that he's going to do it. But whatever he says, we brought jobs back to this John Deere factory or da-da-da-da. You look into the details and you find that, basically that's not true at all. His message starting in 2016 was so powerful and so different than what people had been seeing before from Democrats or Republicans that his sort of affect really connected with people on a visceral level and sort of saying like, you guys have been getting screwed for decades. And I'm going to offer something different. I'm going to come in and sort of undermine all of the powers and drain the swamp that have been keeping you guys down for so long. And, he literally used language that he took from speeches by Richard Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO, the largest, the Federation of Labor Unions. And that kind of messaging really struck a chord with people. And even after he's not really delivering for people very much, I think a lot of voters have just sort of decided that he's their only salvation, and he's a businessman, he's a disruptor, and we can trust him. And they're willing to give him a lot of latitude. But I think that was really, really powerful, even just the symbolic, I hear you, I feel you, I'm mad, I'm angry like you are. And that's not something that Democrats have been really offering, and that really, really struck a chord. I'm not saying that other things didn't matter in terms of his use of racism and xenophobia. Obviously, those were really important to the story as well. But I do think that they're all kind of bundled up in this package of anti-elitism, and we're kind of fed up and we're not going to take it anymore. And this guy's an asshole, but he's our asshole.
So along those lines, thinking about the Republicans, what have they said concretely that you think is working to appeal to working class voters?
Well, one of it is negative portrayals of the Democratic Party. That's very powerful. They're extremely effective in finding those inflection points, those types of issues that they can magnify into central issues in American politics, like, say, trans women in women's bathrooms or something like that, which they very clearly poll tested maybe a decade ago and discovered that this would be a really important thing for them to latch onto to try to vilify the Democrats as being extreme and out of touch. And they have a much better media echo chamber than the left does. They have decades of experience with alternative media that the left has in a much more limited way. They've been focusing on addressing immigration, which was a big problem that the Democrats just simply didn't address in the Biden administration until it was too late, essentially. And the other thing is that they're able to put forth this idea that they care about working people and that they have a focus on bread and butter issues and on trying to make the economy hum again and do anything that they can to create economic opportunity for the American public. We're going to do anything we can to bring back jobs. And even if it means, tariffs, we're going to do anything we can to create economic opportunity. And it might be bullshit in reality. And, I think it is basically, but it's been pretty effective in reaching working class voters.
I understand and I believe that people are responding favorably to the survey asking about these economic populist platforms or positions. But the things that are so powerful are about immigration and this sort of cultural value of who's in and who's out, and trans athletes or trans women in bathrooms. And so which is it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's both. There were a lot of people that initially were just really pissed off that the Democrats were not delivering for them economically. And it's all kind of caught up in the fact that the Democratic Party image and the focus of the party culturally, they became much more focused on college educated folks. And the sort of liberals basically had a completely dominating worldview in much of the mainstream media for a really long time. And those things come together to create a sense of alienation and even feeling condescended to by Democrats. And I think that a lot of these policies around the trans stuff and immigration are, to many folks, another example of, oh, Democrats don't care about me, they care about these other people. And does that mean that there are no people that are completely motivated by anti-trans attitudes or anti-immigrant attitudes? Obviously not. I don't think it's true that we can sort of say, well, it's one or the other of these two things, because in many ways, the economic piece of this gets sort of transmuted into the cultural aspect of it, even on something like immigration.
When I began talking to Jared about this episode, he directed me to an article titled The Latino Rebuke, co-authored by René Rojas and Maribel Teneo. I thought the article was a persuasive explanation of this push and pull of the cultural and economic forces at play, with a particular focus on working-class Latinos, a group that generated many headlines following the 2024 election. So I was excited when René, an assistant professor of human development at Binghamton University, agreed to an interview. His research typically focuses on politics and movements in Latin America, but he applied some of his analytical frameworks to make sense of the working-class surge toward MAGA. Does this research that you've done on the Latino voter have broader implications for working class voting patterns across race?
Yeah, I think it does. I think that it should help illuminate how we understand not only how Hispanics or Latinos are voting, but how all types of working people are voting. Working class support for MAGA has been to attribute this shift to white workers' racism, that they can't help but support Trump when he comes on the scene, even if it goes against their interest. And so they started to make similar claims about Latinos. Well, they too are sexist. They too can be xenophobes. They too can be caught up in white supremacist ideologies. And we just found that was unconvincing. Going back many generations, Latinos have always reported more socially conservative opinions around, for instance, same-sex marriage back in the 90s and on reproductive rights and abortion. Those positions, those kind of, if you want to call them, cultural orientations, didn't translate into, far right-wing political attitudes and voting behaviors. So what needs to be explained is the shift. And if their cultural attitudes aren't really changing, there must be something else at work that's moving them in this other direction. And I think a large part of that is quite reasonable, of course, frustration with what's on offer in American politics.
What did the Democrats offer the Latino voter over the years that brought them to vote Democrat that changed? And what did the Republicans say that was so compelling this time to swing the vote as much as it did?
Okay, well, if they're rejecting increasingly the Democratic Party, that needn't mean that they're going to automatically flock to Trump and MAGA. There's got to be something positively attracting them toward right-wing populism. And I think, interestingly, a lot of it was articulated around immigration. Now, we want to be very careful about how we make this argument. But essentially, during these elections in particular, but increasingly now for some time, Democrats had, when it comes to reaching out to Latinos, have been leading with the issue of immigration. MAGA is a threat to immigration. They're treating your people, your cousins, what have you, badly. They're rounding them up, locking them up. And we expect you all to come together as a monolithic bloc because you share some kind of mythical pan-ethnic connection and willingness and a desire to defend immigrants against xenophobia. And it turns out that that's not what was first in mind. That wasn't the priority of Latino voters. And they were looking for something more substantive to help them meet their needs in increasingly challenging times.
What did the Republicans offer that was so compelling?
Here's where I think, in the absence of a set of welfare policies that can protect Latinos, if they're unable to hold on to their jobs or if their wages are cut, then Latinos, like all other workers, are going to lean toward more individual, more competitive strategies. So policies, for instance, that promise to limit the entrance of new competitors, possible immigrant workers competing for those precarious jobs, will look more appealing, again, in the absence of better alternatives. Promises to revive certain sectors of the American economy. Remember that even with the decline in manufacturing, Latinos remain disproportionately represented in those blue collar jobs, right? What's happening, in my view, is that they're ditching the Democrats and they're trying out something else. It does not mean at all that they will be permanently committed to white supremacy, to xenophobia. I think, again, when other things aren't working out, they're testing the waters, as it were. They're testing membership in the MAGA coalition to see if it might help.
We can all understand that the economy has changed over decades. Though what's striking to me is that, it's been immigrants are taking your jobs. Now, recent immigrants are also afraid of immigrants taking their jobs.
You increasingly see immigrant Latinos adopting anti-immigrant views. And that seems like a contradiction, but it really needn't be. It makes a lot of sense. I'd like to point out at this point that naturalized citizens, so immigrant citizens, voted at higher rates for Trump than native-born Latinos. And one way to think of this is to say, well, she's an immigrant. Why would she adopt anti-immigrant views? But that person isn't necessarily making her calculus in those terms. They might be totally rooted in, an assessment of her own situation, her own interests. I need to hold on to this job, and I need to make sure wages at least don't decline any further for my sake, for my kids' sake. Okay, now let me think about how to go about doing that. What the Democrats are offering don't seem to offer much in terms of helping me do that. But wait a second, here's MAGA. And I'm not against immigrants, but if we can restrict the inflow of possible competitors, that might help me, that might help my own interest.
René points out the failure of a culture-focused explanation for working-class Latinos swing to the right. He makes a strong argument for messaging and action around jobs and the practical needs of working people, something the Democrats have failed to do. Now we'll return to my conversation with Jared to hear about how this plays out across the Rust Belt. Something I learned in season 1, talking with Sarah Janes, who's the director of the Rural Democracy Initiative, is that voters who are conservative are open to various policies one might consider more progressive. But once they're labeled Democrat, they're not interested anymore. This also comes up in your research, and the insight isn't new. Why is it taking so long to be understood and acted on by politicians?
I mean, it's not that easy to fix, right? If you're a Democratic politician, you're kind of limited in your options for how you address it without just leaving the party, which Dan Osborne, the Nebraska Senate candidate 2024 and running again, he was able to run on certain things that have not been sort of coded as Democratic. And he's an independent candidate. And so he got a really strong, favorable hearing among Nebraskans because he had these policies like the right to repair, which is something that enables people to basically be able to fix everything from farm products to iPhones in a way that they're not able to right now, and would be a big help to people across the country. That was something that Democrats have kind of been talking about, but only a few, and it wasn't coded as Democratic, like, Green New Deal or something like that. You combine that with the fact that he himself wasn't a Democrat, and then he gets a fair hearing. But how does a Democrat do that? Like, that's the question. And, sometimes it's that they need to find policies that are not coded as Democratic, but ones that are still solidly progressive. Medicare for All is generally popular, say, for instance, but it's very Democratic coded to many voters. There are things related to healthcare that we don't call the Medicare for All that are going to be really popular among those voters. So that's part of the story, is how you frame the policies. And The other part of it is you need to put some distance between yourself and the Democratic Party establishment. Like we talk about Jared Golden or Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, these are not like the most progressive folks in Congress, but one thing that they do really effectively is they talk about how both parties are out of touch. They talk about how they're not those people. All they care about is the folks in their district and delivering for working class people. And more Democrats need to do that.
Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez in particular, watching her ads really align with this presentation of working classness and appearing working class and how powerful that is.
Our research shows that actual working class candidates do much better among working class voters than middle class candidates do. So that piece alone, whether or not you are legitimately working class or not is a separate thing. But generally, when we say that somebody's a working class candidate in a survey compared to other types of candidates, they get a significant 5, 6, 7 point bump relative to candidates who are otherwise very similar. And we also see this showing up in real election results. We just did an analysis of candidates from 2010 to 2024, where we found that those who present themselves as working class in their messaging, they do significantly better in communities that have high percentages of working class voters than those who do not. So that's not a magic bullet, but it's something that's a really important part of the story. And only 2% of members of Congress and about 3% of people who run for Congress have a working class background. So that's an area where we can make real improvements.
How did you present working classness to people taking the survey? Did you just simply say this is a working class candidate, or were there characteristics you presented of working classness to give them that persona?
We just did it simply as the occupation. This is a school teacher, or this is a manual worker. And we gave a bunch of different occupations that were working class. And all of the results are pointing in a similar direction, that the representation as working class, really matters. In general, recruiting more working class candidates, as some places are doing, is going to be a really important part of the toolkit here.
I spoke with Les Leopold, who's a collaborator in this research that you're talking about. And he and I talked in a previous episode about unions and building worker power. He was clear that workers need political power and proposed an independent political party. But he did talk about the survey results, how favorably people saw this independent, should we call it a third party? What is your take on this in practice?
I do think that there are plenty of places where there's just no chance that a Democrat's going to get elected. And those are places where having more independent candidates like a Dan Osborne, can make a real difference and could actually help to get more working class focused candidates elected. And even beyond that, help in the broader process of getting working class politics back in local small town and rural communities, right? It's part of a broader process that great organizations like the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative and others are doing to try to create civic associations and rebuild the spaces for working class people to organize and to, advocate for themselves that have been eviscerated by the basically disappearance of unions from small town and rural America.
Is there anything more you want to say about working class social and economic attitudes, political attitudes, working class voters broadly?
Two things. One is that contrary to what a lot of these centrist reports that you're seeing, they say that the working class folks are more conservative on economic issues than middle class folks. That is not true. And our report shows that systematically working class people are more progressive on a host of issues. And that tells us that the economic issues are the ones where, if we can raise the salience of these issues relative to more divisive social and cultural issues in the electoral scene, then that's where Democrats are going to succeed and excel. On the other hand, working class people are not these crazy reactionaries that sometimes they're portrayed by the basket of deplorable style language, right? Which is, how Clinton described half of Trump voters in 2016, Hillary Clinton. And the reality is that working class voters have become more progressive across all social domains and cultural domains over the last 20 or 30 years compared to the previous period. And so there's a huge amount of opening here for reasonably progressive policies that the vast majority of Americans would agree on, that Democrats could run on. And so I do think that that's really, really, really important. We don't have to throw in the towel to say, oh, the working class people are conservative, we just need to move to the center. No, there are lots of progressive, practical policies around social and cultural issues that working class people overwhelmingly agree with. For instance, a path to citizenship, for folks that have been here and played by the rules. Like 75% of people agree with that in some surveys.
So how do you account for the research findings you just cited? How are they capturing that particular conclusion?
We found something along the lines of there's between 10 and 20% of 2020 Trump voters who basically agree with a more or less Bernie-style economic populist platform on economic issues. Even the 2020 electorate, which I think is more ideologically conservative than the 2024 Trump electorate, even then we're seeing a percentage of folks in the Trump coalition that is way larger than the margins that we need to win in all the key swing states, who fit that profile of people that could be reachable by Democrats if they have a messaging around social and cultural issues that is culturally competent to working class voters while still being progressive and defending communities and their right to a safe and secure life for them and their families, and that also taps into strong economic populism.
Now I'll go back to Drew, our working class voter from Ohio, to hear what he sees for the future. Do you get why they voted for him?
Some people, I think it's because he was technically, like an outsider of politics, and I don't know how some people got convinced he's this great businessman, but they just figured he's something different. He's not a Washington insider, and that he could have these new ways to get things done to actually help people. And I don't think that was part of his plan at all. I think it was just a way to get people to vote for him.
If you could imagine a candidate that you could vote for and your coworkers who voted for Trump could vote for, who is that? If you could make that candidate, who would it be?
I mean, I like that James Tallarico dude in Texas. He's a Democrat I think he's like a state House member or senator. I've seen some interviews with him, and he seems pretty level-headed and to like kind of understand the issues that a lot of people are kind of going under. But he's a good speaker, and you need somebody that is in touch with working class issues. I mean, we're the majority of the country. I feel like our interests should be the most supported. You know what I mean?
Is there anything you want to say that I didn't think to ask you?
I think we kind of need to bring back people organizing together to actually fight for the wages they deserve, because I'm not naive enough to think that just because I vote for the right person means they're going to do everything I want for me. I mean, if you look through the history of the labor movement, it's always been the regular working class people banding together to make things happen for themselves. It's going to boil down to like people actually talking with each other and organizing together to get the things that I feel that they have earned.
And do you think that there's enough commonality for working class people to actually come together? Part of what we're talking about in this season is forces that are capturing and dividing the working class.
Yeah, I think it would be, especially now, it's going to be hard for it to happen because people are so divided on social issues. And there's been a really good job done dividing working class people against each other so that we don't come together and actually fight to earn the things that we deserve.
Do you ever talk to your coworkers about this kind of stuff?
I try to. Anytime somebody brings up issues like that, I try to remind people that the only reason we have it as good as we do is because people fought and died to earn these rights. I think a lot of people just don't know the history. I mean, a lot of that history isn't taught, and I think part of that's deliberate because a well-informed working class is a dangerous one.
I really wanted to find a clear conclusion to this episode, to definitively say it's the economy or it's the culture war. But it's all of it. It's pretty clear, whether from survey data or Drew's coworker conversations, working people want political leaders they can trust who will actually deliver for everyday people. Someone who'll focus on economic issues as well as the cultural divides polarizing the country. Drew's coworkers were preoccupied with the culture wars, magnified by the Republicans, while also wanting to maintain their economic stability. They threw their vote behind a big talking businessman who stoked social division, and now it's the increased costs of everyday essentials that's on their minds most. And René and Jared present compelling cases for why working class voters swung right, and what it will take for them to swing back. But beyond better political candidates, it's also going to take a team effort by working class people. So what will it take to unite a divided working class? I'm not totally sure, but maybe we try laughing about it?
I don't know how anyone makes money. I honestly worry about that for people every day. I'll see someone and I'll be like, I don't know how you're going to do it. I mean, there's a $45,000 signing bonus to join ICE. So, and the economy is so bad, you think about it. Could I rip a family apart for $30,000 after tax?
That's coming up on Shifting Terrain. Shifting Terrain was executive produced by Amanda Cowper and myself, Rachel Rybichuk. Audio mixing by Tina Toby Mack. Thank you to our guests, Jared Abbott, René Rojas, and Drew. Also, we'd love it if you'd rate, follow, and share the show.